I'm Juliana Sutliff, and today I'm going to be discussing the 1951 Rodgers and Hammerstein classic, The King and I. According to RodgersandHammerstein.com, The King and I was composed by Richard Rodgers, and the lyricist and librettist was Oscar Hammerstein II. This is an iconic writing duo who are responsible for Cinderella, The Sound of Music, South Pacific, and The King and I. They wrote Oklahoma in 1942, which was a turning point for musical theater because of the focus on story that had never been seen before in that magnitude. The show that we're talking about today, The King and I, is based on the 1944 novel Anna and the King of Siam by Margaret Landau. This is according to Tripod.com, and this is about the story of Anna and the King of Siam behind the book Anna and the King of Siam. So Margaret Landau wrote this book based on Anna Leonowens' memoirs, which were not exactly reliable, which historians figured out a little bit later. They were incredibly popular in their time. They were New York Times bestsellers, and she even wrote a sequel, which was even less accurate to her original memoir. It included a lot of racism and questionable lies, like the king throwing his wives in dungeons if they displeased him, which they later found out he didn't even have dungeons. She claimed that people were burned in the town square, which couldn't be confirmed by anyone who was alive at that time, including people who weren't from Siam, which is now Thailand. So it was just odd lies that she told to make it more exciting. And here we have the cover of the book, and then the cover of the film, which actually won an Academy Award. And this story includes kind of a white savior complex, where it's the job of the Western white person to save the savage Easterners or the savage foreigners, which can be overcome with the correct direction, which I'll talk about later. Here's my favorite cover for Anna and the King of Siam, which includes the subtitle, "The Famous True Story of the Splendid Wicked Oriental Court," which is, it's not true and it's not wicked. So it's just sort of an interesting title, and you can see the way that the world viewed this story just based on that subtitle. This is according to ThoughtCode.com. The King and I is set in 1863, which was a time of change for Siam. King Mongkut was the ruler, and he was known as the modernizing king. 3 kings later, his son Chulalongkorn, and then his son was the one who started the alliance with the British. And King Mongkut was actually a lot more advanced than the show gives him credit for. He had trouble with modernization, but he also welcomed it. You can see the picture of him here because he was the first person in Siam, he was the first ruler in Siam to have his photo taken. And he invited a photographer to Siam, and you'll see some photos of that on the next page. And this is a portrait of Anna Leonowens. And the actual show itself was written in 1951, which is post-World War II, which was a time of camaraderie internationally, so people were a lot more accepting of other cultures, and there was a lot of the feeling of, if you were on our side, you're our friends, and we're really all one people for a while. It didn't last, and it wasn't 100% of the population it felt that way, but people were a lot more open to that sort of a feeling at this time than they had been previously, which Rodgers and Hammerstein definitely capitalized on. The show is set in Siam, and this is according to the BBC News. Siam is now Thailand, and the Royal Palace is the setting of the show, but it's inside the Royal Palace. But I have some photos of the outside of the Royal Palace, which are taken by that photographer I mentioned before, these are the first pictures of Thailand, or Siam, ever taken. You have a picture of one of King Mongkut's white elephants. You have a picture of the outside of the palace, and you have a picture of the river from the palace. According to John Kenrick from When Broadway Ruled, Anna Leonowens is the governess of the story, and here we have a photo of Anna, but played by Gertrude Lawrence, who was the original Anna. And then we have King Mongkut, who is played by Yul Brynner, who played him over 4,000 times in his life. And Anna is a governess from Wales who has trouble fitting in and accepting Siamese culture, but who learns from the Siamese and teaches as well. And then King Mongkut, they have similar issues. He has trouble accepting the Western modernization and changes from tradition, but he manages to learn and teach Anna on the way. Then we have Tuptim, who is King Mongkut's most recent wife, because he does have a harem of wives, and she's very unhappy where she is. She doesn't want to be with him because she's in love with Lung Ta, who is the man who brought her. They're both Burmese, and they came from Burma, and he brought her to King Mongkut, but he's actually in love with her, and they're the forbidden love story. They're the secondary plot. And then Lady Tiang, who is the king's head wife, and she is kind of the catalyst for Anna understanding the king. So Anna Leonowens moves to Siam to be the governess to King Mongkut's children, but when she arrives, she finds it to be a little different than she was expecting. She doesn't get a house that she was promised, which becomes sort of a plot point throughout. She has to teach his wives in addition to his children, which she was not prepared to do. And she just has trouble with some of the customs. And then our secondary story is Lung Ta and Tuptim, who find ways to meet each other throughout, and we see them sort of in the shadows, being in love, and they try to escape together, and it's unfortunately ill-fated. But back to the primary storyline, the king and Anna do not get along throughout the show. They come to an agreement at the end, but it's a little too late, and they never really mesh very well, except for in one song, which I'll show you later. And the show is really them learning from one another. So now I'm going to show you a clip from the song, Shall I Tell You What I Think of You, which is, I think, a pretty good example of how Anna feels about the king after he calls her his servant.
Shall I tell you what I think of you? You're spoiled. You're a conscientious worker, but you're spoiled. Giving credit where it's due, there is much I like in you, but it's also very true that you're spoiled.
So that's a nice example of the dichotomy of their relationship, because she's mad at him and she thinks he's spoiled, and she's not happy with how he's treating a lot of people, but she doesn't dislike him. She knows he's a good person, and we see that throughout. It's really important that the king is played as a good person, or else the story crumbles. Because the king is a good man, he's just behind the times. And that was a recording of Kelly O'Hara in the 2015 Broadway revival. Next I'm going to talk about that song where they connect, which is Shall We Dance, which is probably the most iconic number of the show. It's definitely the most recognizable visually, because it includes the dress that Anna wears that is kind of synonymous with the show. It was said that Kelly O'Hara shared billing with the dress. And this is all according to the Tennessean. The dress weighed at least 40 pounds, but originally it weighed 75 pounds for Gertrude Lawrence. When the message of the show comes through in this number, really, which I talked about a little bit, that it's the two of them connecting on a human level, which is the most important piece of this show. It's not about the differences, it's about the similarities that they find with one another, because they are teaching each other through their differences, but they have to connect first to do that. And that's really where the longevity of this show comes from, is the core. And actually, just like a fun fact is that Deborah Kerr, the woman who played Anna in the movie, ended up with bruises on her hips because the dress was so heavy. And I'm going to show you a clip from this number that I think exemplifies the sort of unspoken love that they share for one another, and the tension that the show portrays, and it builds throughout, and you see their relationship changing, and this is the culmination of that.
Romeo's count. And one. And one. And one. That is not right.
Oh, yes, it is. You were doing beautifully, Your Majesty.
No, no. Not the way I see Europeans dancing tonight.
Yes, it was. It was just like that.
We're not holding two hands like this.
No. As a matter of fact, Yes.
Come.
So that's from the film version with Deborah Kerr and Yul Brynner. And that exemplifies the relationship that they share. And unfortunately, that's right before a scene that sort of destroys their relationship, where Tuptim, who has just attempted an escape, is brought in by his guards, and he goes to punish her by whipping her. And Anna doesn't stop him, but she verbally stops him and then just watches him, and he can't do it because he respects her so much, and he has so much inner turmoil after she talks to him the way she does, that he actually ends up dying because he just can't survive in the world that he has now. He doesn't know how to fit into this modern world. This is according to IBDB.com, and this is the impact that the show has had on the theater world. The original performance won 5 Tonys, including Best Actress, Best Featured Actor, Best Costume Design, Best Scenery, and Best Musical. I mean, it swept that year. It was iconic. It still is iconic. There have been 15 professional productions just in the US and the UK. There's also been some other productions in other countries, but there was a 1996 and a 2015 revival. I showed you a clip from the 2015 revival, and both of those won Best Revival, the Tony for Best Revival, the years that they premiered. I want to talk a little bit about the original stars of the show, Yul Brynner and Gertrude Lawrence. Yul Brynner played the king over 4,000 times in his lifetime, and this was his defining role. He is best known for playing the king, and he really blossomed in this role. He was not unknown, but relatively unknown when he originally started this. He was actually recommended for the role by Mary Martin, who you might know from a lot of shows. She's probably best known for Peter Pan right now. And then Gertrude Lawrence, unfortunately, she died only a few years into the production, and she was actually buried in the dress from Shall We Dance, which kind of shows how much of an impact it had on her life, because she was actually the one who suggested the story to Rodgers and Hammerstein. Her agent thought that it would be a good story for her after reading the book, and that was the only time that they wrote a story for an actor. And again, I just want to establish that this is a timeless story of humanity, and that's why it has longevity. You can look at it as a racist story or as a problematic story, and sure it is, but it can be produced in a way that is not disrespectful and that shows the differences that Anna and the king have, and still they manage to find love for one another, and they still respect one another, and they learn. And then this is my favorite photo from the show. It's my favorite moment from the show, where the king and Anna are at the same level, because that's sort of a metaphor throughout the show, is that everyone has to be below the king's head. And she takes issue with that. And this is a part where they're at the same level because no one can go any lower. And at the end of the show, the king's son, Chulalongkorn, is coronated on his father's deathbed, and he ends the practice of going lower than the king and of kowtowing to the king, which is where you lay prostrate on the floor as a bow. And here are my references. Thank you very much.